I moved to a small town in Montana. There's one rule: don't open the door after midnight. I didn't move to Dry Creek, Montana because I wanted to. I moved because I had no choice. 3 months ago, my younger sister Emily went missing, and this was the last place anyone saw her alive. The police report said she was probably lost in the woods, but her final text to me told a different story. Don't open the door, no matter what you hear. That one sentence has been echoing in my head every night since. I packed what I could into my beat-up Civic and drove 14 hours straight until I reached Dry Creek, a tiny town tucked into the mountains, population barely 2,000. One gas station, one diner with a flickering red open sign, a sheriff's office that looked abandoned, and a handful of cabins scattered along the tree line. I rented cabin 6 from a gray-haired man named Hank, who smelled faintly of cedar and gasoline. He didn't look me in the eye when he handed me the keys. Stay inside after midnight, he said flatly. Doesn't matter what you hear. Don't open the door. I forced a laugh, thinking it was just small-town paranoia. He didn't laugh back. The cabin was small but cozy, wooden floors, a tiny kitchen, a single bedroom, and a porch facing the woods. There was an old landline phone mounted to the wall, a battered breaker box by the kitchen, and a set of locks on the front door that looked newer than the frame. 2 of them, plus a heavy chain latch. My first red flag. I unpacked, checked the windows, tested the deadbolts twice, and turned on the heater. At 11 p.m., I stopped by the diner for dinner and coffee. That's where I met Ellen, a local waitress who had the kind of tired smile you see on someone who's worked there forever. I mentioned I'd just moved into cabin 6 and that my sister had stayed somewhere near here before she disappeared. At the mention of Emily, Ellen's expression shifted. Her smile faltered, and she lowered her voice. "You're her brother," she said. "You should be careful out there." When I asked why, she hesitated for a long time, glancing over her shoulder before saying softly, "People don't rent cabin 6 twice." She slid my plate across the counter and added, "Get home before midnight." That unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I drove back through the misty streets, parked outside the cabin, and locked both doors. At 11:55, I secured the chain latch, turned off the TV, and left the kitchen light on low. My phone was on the table, camera aimed at the front door, recording. Just in case. I scrolled through online forums looking for any mention of Dry Creek and Emily's case. There wasn't much, but one anonymous comment from last year caught my attention. "They can't come in. They need you to invite them." At 11:58, the lights flickered twice, and the old landline clicked like someone had just picked up and hung up again. The sound made my skin crawl. At 12:03, I heard it. 3 knocks, sharp, evenly spaced. I froze in my chair, heart hammering, staring at the door. There were no footsteps on the porch, no shifting shadows under the light, no sound of the wind in the trees. Then a woman's voice, soft and pleading, came from the other side. "Please, let me in. It's so cold out here." My throat tightened. My first thought was Emily, but I knew her voice, and this wasn't it. "I just need help." The voice continued, quiet, steady, and wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I stayed silent, clenching my fists under the table. I glanced at the landline, dead tone. My cell screen flashed no service. I checked the live feed on my phone camera aimed at the porch. Nothing. Completely empty. Then faintly, the voice said my name. "Alex." I didn't move. My breathing slowed to shallow, pulls of air. I scanned the doorframe with my flashlight, trying to calm myself, when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Faint etchings carved into the wood right next to the latch. I angled the light carefully and read it. "Don't open it. Ever." The voice on the other side spoke again, lower this time, almost casual. "Alex, open the door." My entire body locked. I forced myself to glance at my phone camera again, and that's when I saw something strange. Tiny floating particles like motes of dust, clustering near the door handle. I lowered the phone and looked with my own eyes. Nothing there. I raised the phone again and the particles were back, moving slowly, almost deliberately around the handle. Then came another 3 knocks, faster this time, like it was testing me. I grabbed the baseball bat I'd wedged under the table, stood up slowly, and backed into the hallway without making a sound. That's when I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps on the carpet inside the living room. My stomach dropped. I crept toward the bedroom, locked the door behind me, and shoved a chair under the handle. I crouched low, holding my phone against my chest, trying to slow my breathing. From the other side of the door, there was silence for a few seconds, and then my own voice spoke. If anyone finds this recording, I didn't open the door. Emily, if it's you, leave me something only I'd know. But I hadn't spoken those words yet. I froze, glancing at my phone. The recording app had started playing back on its own. My own voice, warped slightly, was repeating lines I hadn't said aloud. If anyone finds this recording, I yanked the phone off, pulled the battery, and shoved it under the bed. For 30 seconds, there was nothing but silence. Then the woman's voice came back. This time it wasn't pleading. It was smiling. Alex, you left Emily's sketchbook in the blue plastic bin under your bed, right? My heart stopped. No one knew about that sketchbook. I'd packed it myself. I hadn't told Ellen, hadn't told Hank, hadn't mentioned it in any email, message, or call. Either someone had been inside this cabin when I wasn't here, or something outside knew more than it should. At 12:09, the doorknob in the living room turned, slow and deliberate. The chain lock strained but held. Then came the scratching. Long, slow, deep scratches down the wooden door like something was testing its thickness. I stared at the bedroom floor, and that's when I noticed it. A faint, muddy handprint pressed against the carpet right in front of the living room door. Inside, I blinked and it was gone. A thud behind me, my suitcase tipping over. And then, from the porch, 3 perfectly timed knocks matching the sound exactly, as if mocking me. I couldn't breathe. At 12:10, the landline clicked again. The caller ID, dim and dusty, lit up one name, Emily. I didn't pick it up. I just stared as the ringing stopped by itself. I counted to 100 under my breath. Outside, silence returned like someone flipping a switch. Then, soft as a whisper, the voice came one last time, right against the wood. Let me in. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I didn't sleep. When the gray light of morning finally came, I dragged myself to the diner, bloodshot and hollow. Ellen slid me a mug of coffee without asking and said quietly, "First night, huh?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Before I left, she pressed something into my hand. A small wind chime made of deer bones, smooth and polished. "Hang it on your porch," she said softly, "so the house knows someone's living there." When I got back to the cabin, I stared at the faint carvings near the latch again. The words were older than the wood itself, layered deep into the frame like warnings etched across years of panic. That's when I noticed a smaller, thinner line of text carved beneath the warning, so faint I almost missed it. It said, "If you hear your own voice, run." I stepped back, staring at the words, feeling the cold Montana air creep into my lungs. The sun was already sinking behind the trees. Tonight would be my second night in Cabin 6, and I was starting to understand why Hank never laughed. I didn't sleep after that first night. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind through the trees made my nerves snap like wires pulled too tight. By 7 a.m., I gave up pretending to rest and drove into town with a notebook full of scribbled questions. I stopped by the post office first, hoping they'd have copies of the missing person notices from when Emily disappeared. The clerk behind the counter, a balding man with reading glasses, asked for her name without looking up. When I said it, his hands froze on the keyboard for half a second before he nodded and quietly printed the flyer. I thanked him, but when I tried to ask if he remembered anything unusual from that night, he just lowered his voice and said, "We don't really talk about that." He handed me the flyer and looked past me like I wasn't even there. That same look followed me everywhere I went. At the grocery store, at the gas station, even when I stopped to ask an old woman walking her dog, everyone avoided eye contact, muttering something under their breath like a rehearsed line, "Don't get involved." Back at the diner, Ellen was refilling mugs behind the counter. She spotted me, frowned slightly, and slid me a cup of coffee without asking. "You look worse than I thought you would," she said softly. "First night's the hardest. It gets easier when you stop listening." I set the flyer down on the counter and tapped it with my finger. "Emily stayed here. She was last seen walking near the creek. Do you know why she was out there after midnight?" Ellen stiffened and glanced around before leaning close enough that I could smell the coffee on her breath. "You need to stop asking questions like that," she whispered. "This town doesn't forget what happened. It chooses not to remember. That's different." I frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She hesitated, glanced at the door, and finally said it. "They come to the doors, Alex. After midnight. They sound like people you know. Family, friends, lost hikers. Doesn't matter. You open the door, you don't come back." The air between us felt heavy, like even saying the words out loud carried weight. I thought she was exaggerating until she added almost under her breath, "Ask Hank why his wife disappeared." Before I could respond, the bell over the door rang and a deputy in a tan uniform walked in, boots clattering softly against the tile. Ellen stiffened immediately. The man glanced at me, nodded curtly, and ordered black coffee to go. His name tag, Red Cole. I followed him outside before he could leave. "Deputy Cole," I said quickly. "I'm Alex. My sister went missing 3 months ago. I know who you are." He cut me off. His voice was low, calm, but edged with warning. "If you're smart, you'll pack up and leave before Friday." That made my stomach tighten. "Why Friday?" He didn't answer directly. He just glanced up at the gray clouds rolling over the mountains and muttered, "Full moon's coming. Some folks here don't take chances." He handed me his card and started to walk away. Then he paused, looked back, and said something that chilled me. "If you hear a knock, Alex, never answer it, not even if it sounds like her." By the time I got back to the cabin, the sun was sinking low and the woods behind the property had filled with heavy fog. The small wind chime Ellen gave me clinked softly against the porch post, the bones rattling like tiny teeth. I took out my notebook and wrote down everything. The voice last night, the carvings on the doorframe, the fake Emily, the landline showing her name. It didn't add up. There was no way anyone could know about the blue plastic bin under my bed unless someone had been inside this cabin. That thought gnawed at me as I inspected every window and lock, double-checking for signs of tampering. At 11:40 p.m., I killed all the lights except one lamp by the couch and sat by the front door, my phone recording again, notebook open, waiting. At 11:57, the wind chime rattled violently for 2 seconds, even though the air was still. My pulse quickened as I checked the porch cam feed on my phone. Nothing but fog and the faint reflection of the porch light on wet wood. At exactly 12:04, the knocks came. 3, soft but deliberate, the same as last night. My throat went dry as I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. Then came the voice, but this time it wasn't the woman. This time, it was Emily. "Alex?" The sound was so clear, so real that for one dizzy second my brain believed it. "It's me," the voice whispered, trembling like she was cold. "Open the door. Please." I clenched my fists and stared at the door handle, watching for movement. Nothing. I checked the porch cam again. Empty. Completely empty. I whispered without thinking, "Emily." And from the other side of the door, silence. 10 seconds later, my phone vibrated violently on the table. A new text message from Emily's number. "Let me in." My hands shook as I unlocked the phone, checked the message thread, and scrolled up. But the entire conversation was gone. No history, like it had never existed. Then, from behind me, a soft voice said my name. "Alex." I spun around, heart pounding, Phone clutched tight, but the living room was empty. Every muscle in my body locked as I listened, waiting. But there was nothing. Just the faint buzz of the heater and the rattle of the wind chime outside. That was when I remembered the carving on the doorframe, the one I'd almost missed yesterday. I got up slowly, flashlight in hand, and traced my fingers over the deep grooves in the wood. The warning was still there. Don't open it, ever. But beneath it, scratched so faintly I had to tilt the light just right, I saw another line I hadn't noticed before. If you hear your own voice, run. My stomach dropped. At 12:08, I grabbed my phone, turned on the live audio recorder and held it up to the door. If that's you, I whispered, barely audible, tell me something only Emily would know. Silence. I waited. Then came a soft, shaky breath from the other side, and my voice answered, Alex, it's me. I stared at the door, frozen. The recorder app was still running, time-stamping every second, but the waveform was flat. No sound, no input detected. And yet I heard my own voice as clearly as if I'd spoken. That's when something metallic clinked on the porch, faint but sharp, like a key dropping onto wood. I checked the porch cam again, and for the briefest moment I thought I saw movement at the far edge of the fog, a pale figure just out of focus, standing still, watching. Then the feed glitched, lines tearing across the image, and when it cleared, the porch was empty. My phone buzzed in my hand. Another message from Emily's number. You shouldn't have moved here. At 12:10, the knock stopped. The air felt heavier somehow, like the cabin was holding its breath along with me. Then the heater clicked off. The wind chime outside went dead still, and somewhere deep in the woods, I heard it. 3 slow knocks echoing faintly, like someone tapping on a hollow tree trunk, far away but getting closer. I backed away from the door, clutching my phone, and whispered into the recorder, I didn't open it. I won't open it. I don't know why I said it out loud, but something about the silence made me feel like I had to declare it, to myself, to the cabin, to whatever was out there listening. As the clock crept past 12:15, the air finally shifted, like pressure releasing after a storm. The heater kicked back on. The wind chime rattled once and went quiet again. I sat there for another 30 minutes before forcing myself to shut off the recorder, power down my phone, and crawl into bed fully dressed, lights still on. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Because I realized something as I lay there staring at the ceiling. Last night, the knocks came from the front door. Tonight, they came from the front door first, then from the woods. If the sound kept moving, then tomorrow night, there'd be nowhere left for it to go but inside. I woke up the morning after night 2 with the kind of headache you get from grinding your teeth in your sleep. Except I hadn't slept at all. I just stared at the ceiling, waiting for the heater to cycle, and for the wind chime to stop pretending. It knew things I didn't. The notebook on the table was a mess of arrows and underlines. Post office clerk froze at Emily's name. Ellen's warning. Deputy Cole saying, leave before Friday. Text from Emily's disconnected number telling me to let her in. The carving under the latch whispering, if you hear your own voice, run. I made coffee that tasted like burned dirt, plugged my phone back in, and opened the audio app from the night before. The file had auto-saved at 12:26 a.m., 32 minutes long. I told myself I was listening as a rational person looking for normal explanations, pipes, thermal expansion, wind, any dumb thing my nerves had upgraded into terror. But I wanted to hear a human mistake, a cough, the friction of a jacket, a clue that could be followed down a hallway that ended with a door marked ordinary. I put in headphones and hit play. The first 5 minutes were what I remembered. The hush of an old house, the faint electrical buzz, one breath I knew was mine. And then at 12:04, 3 knocks, soft, even, not urgent. The waveform showed them as 3 clean spikes. I zoomed in and noticed something that made the hairs on my arms lift. In the low frequencies under 150 hertz, where the thud of a hand should be thickest, there was nothing, just a gate-smooth valley. It looked too clean, as if somebody had filtered out the body of the sound and left the outline. Then the voice came, the "please let me in." That wasn't Emily. And right there, I heard it again. between syllables. A pattern of breaths too, steady to belong to a real person. A loop of air reused with no variance, like a metronome attached to a pair of lungs that didn't care about oxygen. I kept listening. At 12:07 the heater cut, which matched my notes, and the voice changed to say my name, and then the text came through. The app shouldn't have caught a phone vibration on the table, but the mic did, and the waveform jumped like a fish at the surface. I scrubbed forward, found the exact second I whispered, "If that's you, tell me something only Emily would know," and watched the line stay weirdly flat even as I heard myself speak. The app should have recorded my whisper, but there was almost nothing. A thin ghost of sound that didn't match the clarity in my ears. 10 seconds later, the voice on the other side answered with my own voice, "Alex, it's me." And here the waveform twitched in the high bands like interference, like a radio sweep, not like a live voice pressed through wood. I rewound 3 times, heart racing, listening for breath, spit, room tone, anything, because real voices live inside rooms and leave fingerprints, and this one felt like it came from a place that didn't know what a room was. At 12:09, right, on time, the doorknob rattle, the chain strain, and the long, slow scratch. The audio captured a gritty texture like metal dragged across varnish. But when I isolated it and played the scratch back at half speed, it didn't sound like metal at all. It sounded like small, hard points working in sequence. 5 of them. No palm, no smear. I stopped, took my headphones off, and looked at the door as if it could produce an explanation just because I was staring at it. Then I put the headphones back on and kept listening. At 12:10, the landline clicked and the caller ID flashed Emily. I'd written that sentence in my notebook like I didn't trust my memory. Then 1 minute of nothing, then 3 hollow knocks way out in the woods, each spaced 20 seconds apart. I boosted the gain and heard an echo off the creek bed, but it was wrong too. Echoes repeat the sound that made them, but this one came back thinner, like the woods answered with a drawing of the knock instead of the knock itself. And then, something else almost too quiet to catch under the last knock. A second, fainter tap, 1/2 beat after it. Precisely consistent, a tail tied to the original. I stopped the file there and stared at the timestamp, thinking about copies and lures and what a borrowed voice might borrow next. By late morning, the sky had gone a flat tin color, and the wind pushed the scent of wet pine through the seams in the window frame. I drove to the hardware store and bought a second chain latch, 2 slide bolts, a fresh door sweep, and 3 bags of ice melt because they didn't sell rock salt in August, and the old woman at the register looked at me like she understood why I was going to pour it along my threshold anyway. Back at the cabin, I installed the hardware, double-checked the hinge screws, and set my phone on the table with the voice recorder armed and a second app ready to log decibel spikes. I pulled the blue plastic bin from under the bed just to make sure it was still there. Emily's sketchbook was inside, along with a bundle of charcoal pencils and a Polaroid of a trail marker near a creek. The word "left" written in her frantic slant at the bottom. I stared at the photo longer than I meant to, looking for something in the trees, a figure, a shadow, anything. But it was just a trail marker with peeling paint and a piece of sky that couldn't decide whether to be blue. I put the bin back, shoved it deep until it bumped the baseboard, and checked the front door again. The carving was where I'd left it, the warning dark with dirt pressed into the cuts by years of fingers. Beneath, "Don't open it ever," I could now see a third line I'd missed even this morning, so shallow I had to hold the flashlight at a hard angle. "Don't play it back." A simple sentence that didn't explain anything and somehow explained everything. I wrote it in the notebook. Noon passed without anyone calling or knocking or pretending to care that I was stirring up a story the town preferred to file under silence. I ate late lunch at the diner. Ellen slid me pie I didn't ask for, and when I told her about the breathing pattern on the recording, she went very still and said, "Don't listen to those after dark." She didn't laugh at me. She didn't say I was imagining things. She just looked like someone remembering the exact shape of a mistake. "You think they're recordings?" I said, testing the word "they," because everyone else was pretending not to say it. "I think they're good at practice," she answered, then added in a whisper, "It's worse when they borrow kids' voices. They use the scrape of fear you'll hear in your own chest. They drag it across the wood and ask you to fix it." I thanked her and left because her hands were shaking and I knew we were at the edge of whatever she felt permitted to tell me. I killed the afternoon by sorting old emails and rereading the last month between Emily and me, which felt like kneeling in a burned house trying to find a photograph that didn't exist anymore. I found a draft I never sent, a paragraph of apologies for being busy and selfish and sure she'd be fine. I deleted it like it could erase the thought. The sky went pink-gray, the wind chime clicked once and then once more, light as teeth. I set the new rule in my head: don't play recordings after dark. At 11:40 I did a last pass on locks, checked the breaker box and set the recorder to begin automatically at 11:55 whether I touched it or not. I dragged the armchair near the door at an angle where I could see the handle, but not the gap under the frame. The wind died so completely that I could hear the faint whine of the refrigerator cycle, and outside the woods lay tense and listening. At 11:58, the landline made its hollow pickup drop sound and then nothing. I wrote it down and refused to decide it meant anything. At 12:02, the house settled, a sharp tick in the kitchen, and I told myself the wood was doing what wood does when temperature shifts push and pull it apart. At 12:04, 3 knocks, softer than the previous night, almost polite. I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the handle, counted my breaths, and set my jaw against the urge to say anything at all. 30 seconds of quiet passed, then the woman's voice again, like she'd been given the script and told to make it warmer. "Please," she whispered. "I'm lost." I didn't speak. My phone vibrated, a text from an unknown number. "Your porch light is out." It wasn't. The porch light glowed steady and the message inside my head was clear enough. They were done asking and had switched to pretending we had already agreed. At 12:06, 3 more knocks, but out of order. Long, short, like a student mixing up notes, and then my sister's voice, perfect in timbre and imperfection, the tiny break on the L of my name, the breath she always pulled too hard between words when she was scared. "Alex," she said, and somehow made the 2 syllables into a rope. My throat closed to a pinhole. "If it's you," I said before I could stop myself, "what did I get you for Christmas when you were 9? Silence. 20 seconds of silence that felt like it had hands. Then my voice, too loud, too clean, through the wood. "The art kit, the blue one." That was true. What was wrong was how it was said. The cadence bled dry of memory. The answer, like a line item in a file. The chain latch twanged softly, a pressure trying the door but pretending not to. The recorder app stamped 12:07:44. I looked at the door frame and saw a new dust line fall from the carved letters like someone traced them from the other side. "Don't play it back," I said under my breath, because the temptation to hit stop and rewind was a muscle twitching under my skin. The wind chime rang twice and went still. And then something happened that broke my careful plan. The phone recording pinged a live auto transcript notification, a feature I didn't even realize I had enabled, and across the lock screen the IEI app attempted to caption what it was hearing. The text populated in real time, jittering into place, and every word that appeared was not a transcription of the voice outside, but a single line repeated, "I am inside." My pulse went cold. The door didn't move. The house didn't change. The app kept writing it. "I am inside. I am inside. I am inside." I killed the screen with a thumb jab and placed the phone face down, because whether it was a glitch or a joke or a warning, I couldn't let the sentence take root. "I didn't open," I whispered to the room like an oath. The knock stopped. The heater cut in. The pressure lifted off the chain like a hand withdrawing from a stove. I sat there until 12:30, every second a brick, then reached for the phone to stop the recording and paused. "Don't play it back," I reminded myself, and I didn't. I set the device on airplane mode and slid it into a drawer. I wrote my rule again in the notebook and underlined it hard enough to tear the paper. The rest of the night passed in thin loops of listening and telling myself not to listen. Dawn came like a truce. I made coffee with shaking hands and only then in daylight allowed myself to scrub the new file's waveform with the sound muted so my eyes could inspect what my ears would not. The knocks were there. The dead bass beneath them was there. The breath loop glitch was there. And at 12:06, something else bloomed across the screen for exactly 1 second. A bloated block of frequencies you'd expect from a burst of AM radio, not a human mouth, centered around a cadence that looked like a word. I clicked on it with the sound off, and the spectral view lit an outline like a mouth saying M and N and D without vowels. An ugly mountain range of the wrong shape for speech. I stared until my vision blurred and then shut the laptop. The town was awake and pretending to forget. I had a ledger of the opposite. They were practicing with my voice now, and they had learned the gift I'd given them when I answered the Yoes night before. I cleaned the coffee cup, rechecked the locks, and laid a line of ice melt along the inside of the threshold because it made me feel like I had drawn a line that belonged to me. Then I wrote a new rule under the last in my notebook. If they say something true, it doesn't make them true. I looked at the door, at the little wounds in the wood where past tenants had left advice for the next stranger, and I knew exactly how tonight would go if I wasn't careful. So I planned. I would set the recorder to run to the cloud, but I would not listen after dark. I would ask one controlled question and time the delay. I would not speak my sister's name. And if I heard my own voice answer from the porch, I would do the one thing the carving told me, the thing it takes pride to ignore and humility to survive. I would run. By the morning after night 3, I knew I couldn't keep pretending this was just paranoia. The scratches on the door were deeper now, new grooves etched alongside the old warnings, and my notebook had turned into a list of rules I didn't want but couldn't ignore. Don't answer. Don't play recordings back after dark. Don't speak their names, and don't trust any voice, not even my own. I needed answers, and no one in Dry Creek wanted to give them. But there was one person Ellen had mentioned in passing, a woman who'd lived here longer than anyone, someone who'd seen the rules before they had names. Her name was Mrs. Delaney, and she lived 2 cabins down, in the weather-beaten place with the faded blue shutters and a porch swing that hadn't swung in years. The first thing I noticed when I walked up was the windows, all of them sealed edge to edge with thick strips of duct tape, layer after layer, like she was trying to keep something out or keep something in. I knocked lightly, and after a pause long enough to make me think she wasn't home, the door cracked open just wide enough for one cloudy gray eye to appear. "You're in 6, she rasped. It wasn't a question. Nodded. "I'm looking for answers," I said quietly. "About the knocks, the voices, my sister." She stared at me for a beat, then opened the door just enough to gesture me inside, locking it behind me with 2 separate deadbolts and sliding a heavy wooden bar across the frame. The house smelled like cedar and dust, a sharp contrast to the wet earth smell outside. There were blankets over the mirrors, tinfoil taped behind the curtains, and an old wind chime hanging over the kitchen doorway made from what looked like carved deer bones, smoothed pale from years of touch. She saw me looking. "It lets them know the house is claimed," she said simply, lowering herself into a faded armchair. "If they think nobody lives here, they try harder." "They?" I asked. She didn't answer right away, just glanced toward one of the taped windows. "You've heard the voices by now, the knocks. But the knocks are just them asking permission. It's when they stop knocking that you need to be afraid." I felt my throat tighten. "What happens when they stop?" Her hands, brittle with age, folded neatly in her lap. "They find another way in." She reached into the drawer beside her chair and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in worn flannel. Inside were 3 tiny bone wind chimes like the one hanging in her kitchen. She set one in my hand, its weight unexpectedly comforting, smooth from years of use. "Hang this above the window nearest your bed," she said firmly. "And when the wind dies but it rings anyway, you don't look. Ever. Not at the window. Not at the glass. Do you understand me?" I nodded, though part of me thought she was leaning too far into superstition, until I remembered the text from the night before. "Your porch light is out." She was dead serious, and every instinct in me told me to listen. Before I left, she stopped me at the door and leaned close enough for me to smell tobacco on her breath. "One more thing," she whispered. "If you see a reflection move before you do, it isn't yours." Those words sat heavy in my chest the rest of the day. I hung the little bone chime where she'd told me and taped the bedroom window edges like hers, layer after layer, until my fingers ached. I tested the locks twice, checked the porch cam feed 3 times and left the recorder armed but muted, promising myself I wouldn't play it back unless I had to. The sun sank fast behind the ridge, leaving the sky the color of bruised steel, and by 11:40 p.m. the fog was already rolling in thick. The air felt heavier than usual, like the woods were holding their breath with me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the taped window, the tiny bone chime swaying slightly in the heater's breath. At 11:55, the house went unnervingly still, as if the walls were listening, and I caught myself holding my breath without realizing. At 12:03, the first knock came. 3 soft taps. Deliberate. Even through 2 cabins worth of distance, I knew it was the same rhythm, the same patience pretending to be politeness. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe. My recorder stayed silent, my phone on the nightstand face down. 20 seconds passed, then 30. Then faintly the wind chime stirred without wind. A hollow clicking sound, sharp and quick, like fingernails wrapping the bones instead of air moving them. My pulse thudded in my ears as I forced myself to stay still. The knocks came again, a little louder this time, but not from the door, from the window. I closed my eyes and focused, on my breathing, steady, silent, counting each second. Then came the voice. It wasn't Emily this time. It wasn't the woman. It wasn't me. It was deeper, older, a whisper dragged low like breath through dry leaves. Look. One word, soft but too close, like it was inside the glass. My body locked. Mrs. Delaney's warning pounded in my head. Don't look at the window. I stared, at the bone chime, refusing to shift my gaze. It swayed harder now, rattling sharp and uneven, like something on the other side was pushing air against it. Then faintly, just under the rattle, I heard another sound, the faintest delayed echo of the chime, a half-beat behind, like something copying the sound instead of making it. My mouth went dry. At 12:05, the window creaked softly in its frame, like a fingertip pressing along the edges, testing the tape. Then, as if it sensed my attention, the heater clicked off. The silence was so absolute I could hear the blood in my ears. That's when I saw it. The faintest shadow caught at the edge of my vision, reflected in the glass. A figure standing perfectly still. I froze, forcing myself not to turn my head, breathing through my teeth, heart pounding against my ribs. The figure didn't move, but in the reflection, it was swaying. A slow, unnatural sway, just enough to register that it was out of sync with me. My hands curled into fists against the sheets, fingernails biting skin, and I clung to Mrs. Delaney's. Words like a lifeline. If the reflection moves before you do, it isn't yours. The bone chime went dead still without warning, stopping mid-sway, and the silence that followed was worse than the sound had been. I counted silently to 10, willing my muscles to stay locked. Then came the softest sound, a quiet dragging like fingertips pulling down the glass, slow and deliberate. And then, the reflection smiled. A small, unnatural curl of the lips, no breath fogging the pain. I didn't move, didn't react, though cold sweat slid down my spine. The smile held for a long second before the shadow blurred and melted back, into the darkness outside the glass. The heater kicked on again, loud enough to make me jump, and when I blinked, the window was just a taped rectangle again, empty and dark. At 12:08, 3 knocks tapped faintly on the door, and I thought I heard someone whisper my name, but I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe until the clock hit 12:15, and the pressure in the room lifted like someone had slowly exhaled. I sat in silence another half hour before crawling off the bed, legs trembling, and went straight to the doorframe. The old carvings were still there, the warning steady, but there was a new mark now. A shallow, fresh groove right under the words, "Don't open it." One single curve, almost like the beginning of a letter. I didn't touch it. At sunrise, I walked straight back to Mrs. Delaney's. She opened the door before I knocked, like she'd been watching, and the first thing she said was, "You saw it, didn't you?" I nodded. Her face tightened, deep lines carving shadows under her eyes. She stepped closer and whispered, "If it smiled at you, Alex, that means it knows your shape now." I asked her what that meant, but she shook her head and pressed a second wind chime into my hand, smaller than the first. "Hang this above your bedroom door," she said, voice cracking slightly. "And whatever happens next, do not look at the glass again." That night would be worse. I knew it before she said it. I knew it by the weight in her voice. By the silent woods, by the way. The wind chime at her doorway rattled once, even though the air was perfectly still. By the morning after night 4, I'd stopped pretending I had any control over what was happening in cabin 6. The carving on the doorframe, the voices that borrowed what they didn't own, the reflection in the window that smiled before I did. And now Mrs. Delaney's warning echoing in my head. "If it smiled at you, Alex, it knows your shape." I barely had time to process it before a knock came at my door. A real one this time, sharp, fast, and in daylight. I hesitated, gripping the baseball bat I kept beside the bed, but when I checked the porch cam, it was Deputy Cole, leaning against the railing like he didn't want anyone to see he was here. I unlocked the door, chain still on, and he slid a small unmarked cassette tape through the gap. "Keep your voice down," he muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "This never existed." "What is it?" I asked, but he was already heading back down the steps. "Don't play it after dark," he said without turning around, "and don't let anyone hear it but you." The tape was labeled in messy black ink, "Emily, 911 call." My stomach tightened as I closed the door and set the chain back, staring at the cassette like it might burn through the desk. I didn't own a player, but Mrs. Delaney might, and I knew if I left this sitting here all day, my curiosity would eat me alive. I walked 2 cabins down, but when she opened the door and saw the tape in my hand, her face drained of color. "You shouldn't have that," she whispered. "Cole gave it to me." "Then he wants you to hear something," she said softly, "but you won't like what's on it." She disappeared into the back room and came out with an old dust-coated tape player, the kind with a cracked plastic lid and yellowed buttons. "Daylight only," she said firmly, pressing the player into my hands. "You understand me? You listen now and you destroy it before sunset." Back in the cabin, I set the player on the table, shut every blind, locked both doors, and pressed play. The static hiss filled the room, crackling like distant rain, and then Emily's voice came through, shaky, low, terrified. "Hello? I need help. Someone's outside my cabin." The dispatcher's calm voice followed, asking for her location, and Emily rattled it off fast, breath uneven. "They knocked 3 times, she whispered. "But they're not answering when I talk." I thought it was a lost hiker, but there was a sound in the background then, faint but distinct, like a low hum, rhythmic and steady, not mechanical, not natural either. Emily's voice trembled when she spoke again. "I can hear them breathing." The dispatcher asked her to stay calm, to stay on the line, but then there was a click, a burst of static, and the sound shifted. My own name came through the speaker. Not hers. Mine. Clear as daylight. Spoken in my voice. "Alex." My hands clenched the table edge until my knuckles burned. Emily's voice came back immediately after, panicked, whispering. "It's using his voice. That's not him." The dispatcher tried to ask her who she meant, but Emily's breathing went ragged, the recorder picking up every shallow inhale, and then the line filled with heavy knocking. 4 hits this time. Not 3. Slow. Deliberate. The sound of her moving fast, footsteps creaking against wood, the landline clattering as she carried it with her. She was sobbing now, saying something I could barely make out between gasps. "Don't open it. Don't answer it. It's not him." Then there was a moment of silence long enough to make me hold my breath, and a faint, distant chime, 4 notes rising and falling like a doorbell, but too warped, too stretched. And then, barely audible, something whispered over the line. Something, not shaped like a human voice at all. "Please." The recording ended there, the player clicking as the tape spun to static. My whole body went cold. I rewound the last 15 seconds and played them again, this time watching the movement of the spools instead of listening, as if avoiding hearing it would make it less real. It didn't. At the exact moment of the distorted "please," the whole cabin seemed to shift in my memory, like I had heard that sound before, but in a dream I wasn't supposed to remember. I slammed the stop button and sat back, palms sweaty, heart hammering so loud I thought the recorder would pick it up. I didn't even realize how much time had passed until I looked up and saw the gray light outside starting to dim. The sun was already sliding down behind the ridge. I grabbed the tape, stuffed it back into its case, and shoved it deep into the drawer under the table, covering it with a stack of old takeout menus. My phone buzzed on the counter, and when I checked it, there was a single notification from an unknown number. "Don't destroy it." My chest locked. I checked the call log. Nothing. No missed calls, no messages in the thread, no number attached to the alert. I shut the phone off immediately, throat dry, ears ringing with static. That wasn't there. At 6 p.m., I sat outside on the porch steps with the bone chime rattling softly overhead, trying to breathe normal air. Across the tree line, the shadows had already begun to pool, stretching up the trunks like slow water. The wind died completely, but the chime moved once, a soft clink like fingertips brushing bone. I went back inside and checked every lock again, taped the window edges a second time, and armed the recorder for the night. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to play it back. But if something happened, I needed proof. At 11:50, the power flickered once and came back like someone testing the breaker. At 11:57, the heater clicked off the way it always did, as if on cue. At 12:02, 3 knocks, soft, steady, perfectly measured. I froze in the hallway, watching the door from the shadows. I didn't answer. A pause stretched so long I counted past 60 in my head, each number sharp and slow. Then, faintly, right behind the door, my sister's voice again. "Alex." The exact intonation from the tape. Not Emily. Not anymore. My phone buzzed on the table. Another text. No number. "You heard it too." My knees locked as I stared at the message, then at the door. Slowly, the knock started again, but something was different this time. They weren't coming from the outside anymore. They were coming from the inside wall next to the window, soft and patient. I forced myself not to look. The bone chime rattled above my bed without wind, and I kept my eyes locked on the door, whispering to myself like a prayer. I didn't open it. I won't open it. At 12:06, silence swallowed the room whole, deep and unnatural, so quiet, I thought I'd gone deaf. That's when the faintest sound threaded into the emptiness, soft enough I almost convinced myself it was in my head. The warped, rising, falling 4-note chime from Emily's tape, playing faintly somewhere outside, echoing just once, then stopping. I knew what that meant before I admitted it to myself. The thing on the tape wasn't staying on the tape. It was here now. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the armchair by the door until the pale blue of morning washed across the cabin, every nerve frayed raw, the tape heavy in the drawer behind me like it was humming against the wood. When the sun came up, the first thing I did was walk to Mrs. Delaney's, pressing the cassette into her hands. Her knuckles went white around it. "You listened at night, didn't you?" she said quietly, more accusation than question. I nodded, once. She shook her head, lips pressed tight, and whispered the new rule like a verdict. "Don't play it after dark. It learns you when you listen." I didn't plan to leave the cabin. Not after 4 nights of knocks and whispers. Not after the reflection smiled at me from the window. Not after Emily's 911 tape. But the Polaroid in the blue bin under my bed had been haunting me for days. The one she'd taken of a trail marker near a creek. The one with "left" scrawled in her handwriting across the bottom. And now, after listening to her last call, after hearing that warped 4-note chime bleeding out of a dead tape recorder, I couldn't ignore it anymore. If there were answers anywhere in Dry Creek, they were out there. I set out just after sunrise with my phone, a flashlight, the Polaroid, and the small bone wind chime Mrs. Delaney had given me. Before I left, she'd stopped me at her porch, squinting against the early light. "Don't go calling names out there," she said softly. Not hers. not yours. Sound carries wrong near the creek. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but her expression told me she'd already said more than she wanted to. The trail started half a mile behind the cabin, a narrow path swallowed by tall grass and black pine, the kind of place where sunlight struggles to settle on the ground. The air was damp and cold, smelling faintly of iron and wet stone, and every step felt louder than it should have. Birds fell silent after the first 10 minutes, leaving only the crunch of my boots and the occasional whisper of wind sliding through the trees. The GPS pinged softly on my phone when I matched the coordinates from Emily's tape to the photo. 2 more turns. I pushed forward, but something about the air changed as I got closer, thicker somehow, like walking into the deep end of a pool. That was when I first heard it. Not knocking this time, not voices, but the sound of running water ahead, faint and uneven, like someone moving buckets downstream instead of a steady flow. I stepped off the trail into a small clearing, and there it was, the creek. Narrow, maybe 6 feet across, shallow enough to see the dark stones beneath. Emily's photo matched exactly. Same twisted tree root, same moss-dark rocks, same broken trail marker leaning against a stump. I took a breath and called softly, "Emily?" The sound went out across the water and died instantly. No echo, none at all. My chest tightened as I tested it again, louder this time. "Hello?" Dead silence. It was wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Even in the densest woods, sound should come back. It always comes back. I stepped closer to the edge and crouched, scanning the stones for footprints, anything she might have left behind. And that's when I saw it. A piece of bright yellow fabric snagged on a thorny branch hanging over the creek. My breath caught. It looked like part of Emily's raincoat, the same one she'd worn in the photo on my fridge back home. The fabric was stiff with mud but dry, like it had been there for weeks. I reached to pull it free and froze at the faintest sound. Someone breathing, slow and deliberate, just across the creek. I didn't look up right away, not until I forced myself to, and when I did, the far bank was empty. Just wet rocks, dense ferns, the curling mist off the cold water. I backed up 1 step, quiet, holding the fabric tight in my fist. Then a voice spoke from behind me, soft, low, just over my shoulder. "Alex." I spun around. No one was there. My pulse slammed into my throat and I forced myself to think, to anchor to something physical. So I hooked the small bone chime from my pocket onto a low branch near the creek and waited. The chime was perfectly still. No wind, no movement. Then after a few seconds it stirred. Once, twice, sharp taps against itself, like fingers flicking it instead of air. That was when a second voice came from across the water, farther back in the trees. Too faint to understand at first until it repeated louder this time. "Emily." My hands went numb. The voice was mine. I stepped back fast, hitting my shin on a root, scanning the far bank for movement, but all I saw was the shifting mist curling in unnatural patterns, rising instead of drifting. And then the voice called again, perfectly pitched. Exactly me. "Emily." Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't, not yet. Not until I checked one more thing. I knelt low, picked up a smooth, flat stone and tossed it into the creek hard enough to splash the opposite bank. It hit the water with a sharp smack and vanished beneath the current, but there was no ripple where it landed. No sound of it hitting bottom. Just silence, swallowing silence. My phone vibrated sharply in my pocket, snapping me out of the moment. I pulled it out and saw a single notification on the lock screen from an unknown number. "Stop calling her name." My stomach flipped. I hadn't called her name out loud since I'd left the trail. I shoved the phone back in my pocket and started to retreat when the ground beneath me trembled slightly, almost imperceptibly, like a truck passing miles away. The bone chime rattled violently now, even though the air was dead still. And then, softly from the other side of the creek, I heard it. 3 slow, perfect knocks against wood spaced like heartbeats. My breath caught as I scanned the tree line, eyes locking on the shadow of a figure standing just inside the fog. Pale, motionless, watching. I shouted across, "Who's there?" The figure didn't move. A faint, delayed echo of my voice came. Back, too fast, wrong direction. From behind me this time. "Who's there?" I spun, scanning the trees at my back, and that's when I heard the unmistakable sound of someone stepping onto wet stones, slow, careful, deliberate, directly to my right. I swung the flashlight around fast. Nothing, just ripples where no one was standing. My phone buzzed again. Another text, same blank number. "If you answer, you stay." That broke whatever fragile bravery had kept me there. I grabbed the bone chime, shoved the yellow fabric into my jacket, and backed up until I hit the trail again, keeping my eyes locked on the creek the entire time. The figure in the fog never moved, but as soon as I stepped past the tree line, the wind roared back all at once, loud enough to make the branches sway, and I realized something that made my stomach drop. I could hear the water running again. I didn't stop until the cabin came into view through the thinning mist, lungs burning, adrenaline crashing so hard I could barely feel my legs. Inside, I locked both doors, threw the chain on, taped the windows again, and collapsed into the armchair, chest heaving. My phone was still in my hand, and when I finally dared to unlock it, the last message had disappeared. Every text from that number was gone. I opened the photo of the creek on my phone, the one Emily took, the same angle, same broken marker, and zoomed in as far as the resolution would allow. My stomach turned cold. In the far corner of the frame, almost invisible, was a faint silhouette standing at the edge of the water. The photo was time-stamped 2 days before Emily disappeared. I slammed the phone face down on the table and grabbed my notebook, writing the rule in thick black ink until the letters carved into the page. Don't call her name outside. At dusk, Mrs. Delaney stopped by unannounced, the first time she'd ever come to me instead of the other way around. I didn't even have to explain. She saw the look on my face, glanced at the muddy boots by the door, and whispered, "You went to the creek." I nodded silently and handed her the piece of yellow fabric. She held it gently, trembling slightly, and whispered, "It's starting early this time." "What is?" I asked, but she didn't answer, just pressed a second bone chime into my palm. "Hang this above the back door," she said firmly. "They know where you've been now." That night, as I climbed into bed, the cabin felt wrong in a way I couldn't name, like I was carrying something back from the creek that hadn't stayed outside. I kept the recorder armed but muted, promising myself again not to play it back. At 12:01, just as I started to drift, a soft sound stirred the edge of my hearing. 3 knocks, not at the front door this time, from under the floorboards. I barely slept after hearing the knocks under the floorboards. It wasn't like the door or the window or even the walls. It came from directly beneath where I was standing, slow and deliberate, like something tapping the underside of the cabin, testing the wood between us. I spent the rest of the night sitting upright in the armchair with the recorder armed, the bone chimes above both doors, and the Polaroid of the creek face down on the table where I couldn't see the silhouette I hadn't noticed before. Morning, light didn't make the feeling lift. The cabin was still too quiet, the silence pressed too tightly against the walls. I needed answers, not warnings, and Ellen had hinted before that the church on the edge of town kept its records going back generations. So I drove into Dry Creek, following the cracked asphalt roads until I saw the white steeple rising behind an iron fence twisted by years of frost. The church itself looked older than the rest of town combined. Stone walls patched in different shades, windows warped by time. Inside, the air smelled of dust and damp wood. A frail man in a dark cardigan appeared from the back, leaning on a cane. "You're the brother," he said softly, his voice rasping like someone who'd said too much once and regretted it. "You've been asking questions." I nodded, showing him the Polaroid. "Emily, my sister. She took this 2 days before. She disappeared." His pale eyes studied the photo for a long moment before he sighed and motioned for me to follow. "Pastor Reeves kept a ledger," he said. "He wrote down everything this town decided not to talk about. Not all of us forget, son. Some of us choose to remember." He led me down a narrow hallway into a basement lined with shelves, the stone walls sweating faint moisture into the stale air. He pulled a thick, leather-bound book from a locked cabinet and placed it on the table like something sacred. The cover was cracked, edges frayed, initials carved faintly into the leather, PR, 1973. My hands felt cold as I flipped it open. Most pages were neat, faded handwriting detailing births, marriages, property transfers, normal town records, until halfway through where the entries changed. The handwriting grew cramped, uneven, ink blotting in dark smudges. The first page of the new section was titled, simply, The Borrowed Voices. My pulse quickened as I read. Reeves wrote about figures that came to doors at night, knocking, 3 times speaking in the voices of missing neighbors, lost family, loved ones. He warned that the rules were always the same. Don't open, don't answer, don't look directly at the glass. But as I kept reading, a pattern began to emerge, one I didn't want to see. According to Reeves, the appearances didn't happen randomly. They escalated over cycles, always in sets of 14 nights. The first 3 nights, knocks only. The next 4, voices begin to mimic. The 7th through 10th, they find ways to enter reflections, claiming familiarity, learning your shape. After the 12th night, Reeves wrote, they begin testing the house itself, marking door frames, crawling beneath floors, whispering your name from vents and drains, trying every forgotten gap where air and memory pass. And the 14th night, the ink was smeared there, Reeves's handwriting jagged, almost torn into the paper. If you hear yourself at the back door and it's already inside. I slammed the book shut without meaning to, hands trembling. The caretaker's pale eyes watched me from across the table. You've started counting already, haven't you? He asked softly. I nodded once, throat dry. 6 nights, I whispered. He inhaled sharply, looked away, then said something I didn't want to hear. You're halfway through. On my way back to the cabin, my phone buzzed once in my pocket. I didn't want to look, didn't want to confirm it, but instinct forced me to. A single text, no number. Night 7 doesn't start at midnight. My fingers went numb. By the time I pulled into the cabin's gravel drive, fog had already started to crawl low across the ground, pale tendrils curling between the pines. I checked the door frames for new carvings. None. Windows still taped, chimes still hanging, recorder armed. But when I stepped inside, the cabin felt wrong, heavier somehow, like the air was occupied. I tried to shake it off and focus on Reeves's notes, laying the journal on the table and marking the sections about the voices, about the cycles, about the shape. The phrase stuck in my head. It learns your shape. At 10:43 p.m., before midnight, the wind chime above the back door stirred once, sharp, like something brushed against it from the inside. My stomach knotted. I grabbed the baseball bat and stood frozen in the hallway, listening. Nothing. The cabin went dead still again. At 11:02, the landline rang once. No caller ID, just a single hollow chime, like someone testing whether I'd pick up. I didn't move. 5 minutes later, a faint scratching came from under the kitchen sink. Rhythmic, deliberate, 3 short strokes, a pause, then 3 more. I opened the cabinet slowly, flashlight ready, but the sound stopped instantly, replaced by silence so deep it roared in my ears. At exactly 11:19, I heard it. Not knocks this time, but a faint, distorted 4-note chime. The same warped pattern from Emily's 911 tape, echoing softly from outside the bedroom window. My chest tightened as I turned my head, refusing to move my body, and saw the faintest ripple in the taped glass, like heat bending light even though the air was cold. Then, impossibly, from the floor beneath me, I heard my own voice whisper, muffled but clear. Alex. I froze, gripping the bat so tight my knuckles hurt. Reeves' words pounded in my head. Don't answer, don't engage, don't look. And then another whisper followed, softer but closer. Open it. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on the window as the ripple in the glass faded. And just as I reached the hallway, the porch cam feed on my phone lit up automatically. I didn't touch it. The live video showed my front steps, the railing, the fog rolling across the gravel drive, and standing at the edge of the porch, perfectly still, was me. My breath caught in my throat, same jacket, same boots, same tilt of the shoulders and down to the scar on my left wrist. The figure stared directly at the camera, head angled slightly, unmoving. I turned the volume up, praying for silence, but a voice came through, low and flat, spoken in my exact cadence. "Let me in." My real self, standing inside the cabin, watching the feed, whispered, "No," before I could stop it. And in the video, the figure's head twitched violently to the side, like a marionette jerked by invisible strings, and it smiled. Slowly. Too wide. The feed cut to static. My phone went black. The bone chime above the back door rattled once, twice, 3 times, then stopped. I forced myself into the bedroom, locked the door, shoved the dresser in front of it, and sat against the far wall, with my phone clutched tight. The silence stretched impossibly thin. At 11:47, I got a final text from the same blank number. 4 more nights. That was when I understood. The knocks under the floorboards, the reflections, the borrowed voices, all of it was escalation. Everything so far had been introduction. The cycle wasn't just starting. It was building toward something on night 14, and I wasn't ready for what came next. But whatever it was, it already knew my shape, and now it had my face. I didn't leave cabin 6 the entire next day. Not after what I saw on the porch cam. My own face staring straight into the lens, my voice saying, "Let me in." The twitch, the smile. The image kept looping in my head like something inside. My memory wanted to overwrite itself. 4 more nights. That text burned in the back of my mind as I sat at the table, notebook open, Pastor Reeves's ledger spread across the wood. My hands kept tracing the last sentence I'd read the night before over and over. "If you hear yourself at the back door, it's already inside." But something was missing from the ledger. I could feel it. Reeves's handwriting jumped, got shakier, as if he'd started rushing at the end, skipping details on purpose. There had to be more somewhere. At 2 p.m. I went back to the church, straight to the basement where I'd found the journal. The caretaker, a pale, soft-spoken man who barely looked at me, hesitated when I asked about Reeves's other records, then finally unlocked a drawer under the cabinet. Inside was a small dust-covered tin box. No label, no lock. He slid it across the table without a word, and his hand trembled slightly as he did. "I shouldn't give you this," he whispered. "Nobody should hear it after dark." I nodded, and took it anyway. Inside were 3 microcassette tapes, each labeled in fading pencil. Field recordings, LSF, and beneath that, coordinates. I plugged one into the dusty old player Mrs. Delaney had loaned me and hit play. Static. Hissed at first, then Pastor Reeves's voice crackled through. Calm, steady, deliberate, like he knew one day someone would need this. March 12, 1973, lost signal field, 4th night of observation. There was a pause, the faint hiss of wind, then Reeves again, quieter. The echoes die here. Same way they've always died. If you stand in the center and speak, the sound doesn't return, but it moves. Somewhere else. I froze, thinking of the creek. How my voice hadn't come back. How instead it had returned from behind me, copied and wrong. Reeves went on. "There are footprints in the moss. 5 sets this week. We've counted. No one walks in, they just appear. The ground sinks half an inch deeper after each visit." His breathing went uneven, static, chewing the edges of his words. Then his voice lowered until it was nearly a whisper. "One of them looked like me today." The tape clicked suddenly, the kind of loud mechanical pop that makes your heart jump. Silence followed for several seconds, broken only by a strange, high-ringing tone, almost too faint to notice. Reeves spoke again, but his voice had changed, softer, slower. The vowels stretched unnaturally. "Don't answer the glass." The player whined, squealed, and then cut off completely. I ripped the tape out and shoved it back in the box, breath sharp, palms damp. Lost signal field. That was the place Reeves was studying, and judging by the coordinates written on the label, it was only 2 miles past the creek where Emily's jacket had snagged. I pulled out my phone to save the location, but before I could type it in, the screen flashed bright white for half a second, then rebooted itself. When it powered back on, there was a single new notification. You're not ready for the field. No number. No thread. Just gone the moment I tried to open it. My stomach churned as I shoved the phone away and started securing the cabin early that evening, taping the edges of the windows tighter, placing the bone chimes above every entry point, even sliding a heavy dresser against the back door. I kept the journal and tapes locked in a drawer, refusing to play them again. Mrs. Delaney stopped by at sunset, holding a small jar of salt in one hand and a flashlight in the other. "Put this on the sill," she said, nodding at the windows. "And whatever you do, don't go near the back door tonight." I wanted to ask why, but her face said enough. I sprinkled the salt and waited. By 10:30, the woods had gone dead quiet. No wind, no insects, nothing. At 11:12, the heater shut off earlier than usual, leaving the air cold and still. I sat in the living room with my back to the wall, bat in hand, phone face down, recorder armed but muted. At 11:41, the bone chime above the front door stirred once. A soft, delicate clink, then silence. 10 seconds later, the chime above the bedroom door rattled hard, like someone had brushed it. I stared down the hallway, heart hammering, waiting for the knocks, the whispers, the voices. Nothing came. The silence stretched too long. At 11:59, the porch cam on my phone activated by itself, showing the grainy night vision feed from outside. No one was there, just fog curling across the gravel like fingers. Then faintly from the back of the cabin came a muffled sound. 3 knocks, slow, deep, from the door I'd blocked with the dresser. My throat went dry. I gripped the bat tighter, refusing to move, refusing to speak. My phone buzzed once, on the table. A new text appeared, the sender blank. "I'm cold. Let me in." My hand shook as I flipped the phone face down. Then another text immediately after. "Please, Alex." My jaw clenched. I didn't answer. I didn't even breathe. That's when the landline clicked and the dial tone died. A voice came through the dead receiver, soft and hoarse, speaking directly into the line. "I'm at the back door." I froze. Slowly, I turned my head toward the hallway leading to the kitchen. Nothing. No shadow. No sound. The wind chimes didn't move. Then, from the living room wall behind me, 3 soft knocks. Inside the cabin. My chest seized, breath trapped somewhere between my lungs and my throat. I backed toward the front door, eyes scanning. The window edges. That's when I saw it. The faintest shape in the glass reflection across the room. My reflection, standing exactly where I was, but with one difference. Its mouth was moving. Mine wasn't. I couldn't hear what it was saying through the glass, but my ears caught a sound anyway. Not outside, not in the room, but directly inside my head. My own voice, calm and quiet. "It's already inside." I bolted for the bedroom, slammed the door, shoved the dresser in front of it, and sat with my back pressed against the wall. The knocks stopped instantly. The silence returned, deep and unnatural, thick enough to make my ears ring. I checked the phone. Dead. I checked the landline. Dead. And then, faintly, above me, from the attic I didn't even know existed, came the sound of the bone chime rattling slowly in the dark. I didn't sleep after the bone chime rattled above me. The attic. I didn't even know the cabin had one until that moment, and now I couldn't stop staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just the wind, even though there hadn't been any all night. At sunrise, I grabbed the old stepladder from behind the shed and set it up beneath the ceiling panel in the hallway. My hands hesitated on the cord for a full minute before I finally pulled. The square hatch creaked open, releasing a rush of cold, stale air that smelled faintly of cedar and something metallic. I climbed up slowly, the flashlight trembling in my grip, every muscle in my body tight and braced. The attic was low and narrow, the wooden beams bowed slightly with age. Dust floated in the thin shafts of sunlight slicing through cracks in the roof, and the insulation crunched faintly under my knees as I crawled forward. That's when I saw it. A small black device wedged into the far corner, its casing cracked but still intact. It looked like an old field recorder, maybe from the 1970s, metal body scratched and dented, wires wrapped with brittle tape. A tag, hung from one rusted screw, faded but still legible. Property of P. Reeves. My pulse spiked. Pastor Reeves had been here, in this attic, in cabin 6. I pulled the recorder free and turned it over in my hands. No batteries, but when I shook it lightly, something rattled inside. A micro reel, maybe magnetic tape, thicker than anything I'd seen before. Back downstairs, I rummaged through the drawer where I'd stored Mrs. Delaney's old tape player and jury-rigged a connection using its battery pack. I didn't know if it would work, but when I pressed play, the reels inside the recorder shuddered once and then began to spin, whining softly as static filled the room. For a long moment there was nothing but the hiss. Then a faint, distant sound. Footsteps crunching on dry leaves, uneven, staggered, like someone carrying weight they couldn't balance. Reeves's voice followed, low, urgent, almost whispering. April 2nd, 1974. Cabin 6 perimeter check. 3 nights past first knock. The air's wrong tonight. He paused, breathing ragged through the static. I've set the monitor upstairs. If they try to breach, we'll hear it. I frowned, glancing up toward the ceiling instinctively. Reeves went on. The field's active again. No birds, no wind, no sound carries. That means they're close. He stopped abruptly, the tape whirring in silence for 5 seconds, then 10. Then came the knocks. Not 3, not 4, but 7. Rapid, frantic, so loud it clipped the mic. Reeves' voice returned, shaky now. They're changing the pattern. That means they've learned the door's locked. My skin prickled as his breathing grew harsher, faster, panic creeping into his tone. Then, faint but clear, a woman's voice came through the static, distant, muffled, pleading, "Please, please open it." Reeves whispered something to himself I could barely make out. Not her, not her, not her. Then the recorder caught something else, a deep, resonant hum, low and steady, vibrating in the tape like a live wire under my skin. The volume spiked without warning, forcing me to rip off the headphones as the hum grew sharper, almost electrical, almost mechanical. The device whined violently and shut down with a sharp click, smoke curling faintly from the cracked casing. My ears rang, heart hammering as I stared at the dead machine. Before I could process what I'd just heard, my phone lit up on the table next to me. A new text from the same blank number as before. "You shouldn't have played it." I slammed the phone face down and backed into the hallway, forcing myself to breathe. That's when I realized something. The bone chime above the back door was moving, slow and deliberate, but there was no draft, no sound. Nothing else in the cabin shifting. I gripped the bat and crept closer, each step making the creak of the floor sound deafening. The chime stopped suddenly, hanging dead still, as if waiting. And then, from the attic above, the exact same 3 knocks I'd heard on Reeves's tape came through the ceiling. Fast, frantic, 7 in a row, I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. "Not possible," I whispered. But the knocks came again, harder this time, shaking dust from the beams overhead. I grabbed the recorder instinctively, rewound it to the section where Reeves's panic began, and let it play. The 7 knocks echoed again through the headphones, but not from the tape. They came from the walls around me, timed perfectly with the playback, like something inside the house was answering the recording. My pulse pounded as I ripped the headphones off and killed the power to the device, shoving it across the table. Then the phone vibrated once more, the blank number lighting up my screen. This time it wasn't a text, it was an incoming call. Against every instinct I had, I answered. Static hissed softly on the other end for 2 seconds. Then a man's voice spoke. My voice. perfectly calm. "Alex, check the attic again." I froze. "No," I whispered, barely audible. The line clicked dead. The recorder on the table spun its reels again by itself, no power supply connected, the sound faint but steady. And then Reeves's voice returned, louder, clearer than before. "If you're hearing this, it means the attic door's open." My blood ran cold as my gaze slowly drifted to the hallway ceiling. The hatch I'd closed an hour ago now hung open, swaying gently, and from the darkness above came the soft creak of shifting weight on old wood. I bolted into the bedroom, slammed the door, locked it, shoved the dresser against the frame, and slid down to the floor, gripping the bat tight as my chest heaved. The silence that followed was worse than any sound I'd heard before. Then, faintly, just beyond the door, my own voice whispered, "Alex." I covered my ears. The whisper came again, lower this time, like someone crouched inches away. "Let me down." The recorder whirred once and died completely, the reel snapping to a stop. And then, from directly above the bedroom, the bone chime rattled violently, louder than it had ever been, as if something heavy had brushed against it in the attic. I sat against the bedroom wall until sunrise, listening to the silence above me. The bone chime had stopped hours ago, but I could still hear it in my head, rattling over and over like an echo that didn't belong to sound anymore. The attic hatch still hung open, swaying faintly in the hallway like it was breathing. I didn't want to go up there, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. Whatever was inside the cabin now wasn't waiting for midnight anymore. At 7 a.m., I grabbed the bat, the flashlight, and the recorder Reeves left behind, setting the ladder under the hatch. My hand trembled on the first rung. Halfway up, I paused, holding my breath, listening for any movement above me. Nothing. Just that strange, heavy silence that had followed me since night 7. I pushed the panel aside slowly, the stale air spilling down the ladder, cold and damp, smelling faintly of wet earth and copper. I hauled myself up, keeping my back low, flashlight sweeping across the attic beams. Dust swirled in the pale morning light, slicing through the gaps in the roof. At first it looked empty, just insulation, storage boxes collapsed under time, and old wiring stapled to the beams. Then I saw it, in the farthest corner, wedged. Behind 2 warped support planks was a small wooden crate, the lid nailed shut but cracked down one side. A tag dangled from a rusted nail, handwritten in faded ink. "Reeves, do not play." My chest tightened. I crawled toward it, every shift of weight making the old wood groan beneath me. Inside the crate were 3 objects: another small reel-to-reel recorder, a rolled parchment map, and a metal device about the size of a lunchbox, covered in switches and dials, its casing etched with symbols I didn't recognize. The map came first. I unrolled it carefully, hands shaking as I smoothed it across the beam. It showed Dry Creek, Cabin 6 marked in red ink, and several black circles drawn deeper into the woods, one of them labeled LSF or the Lost, Signal Field. Around the circles were dozens of short notes written in Reeves's hand, frantic and uneven. Vanishings, 14-day cycles, reflection tests, borrowed patterns confirmed. And then, near the lower edge of the map, scrawled in heavy black ink, was one more note. "They can't cross the field until you let them in." I swallowed hard and set the map aside, reaching for the small reel recorder. Unlike the other tapes, this one wasn't labeled. I hesitated, remembering Reeves's warning, then pressed play. Static hissed for several seconds, sharp and dry, before Reeves's voice came through, faint, uneven, terrified in a way I hadn't heard before. "April 14th, 1974, 14th night. They've breached reflection layer 2. I've sealed the glass, but they're changing tactics." I leaned closer as the tape crackled, heart pounding, until another voice came through behind Reeves's words, a woman's voice. "Alex." My breath caught in my throat. I froze, hands shaking as I stopped the tape. That wasn't possible. This was recorded in 1974, decades before I was born. I rewound the section slowly and pressed play again, pressing, the headphones tight against my ears, and there it was, clear, soft, trembling like she was scared. Emily's voice. "Alex, please help me." My entire body went cold. I yanked the headphones off and nearly dropped the recorder. I stared at it, chest rising and falling fast, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Emily wasn't even alive when this was recorded. This didn't make sense. I replayed it a third time, this time watching the tape reels instead of listening, and realized something horrifying. The reels didn't move during her voice. At all. The sound wasn't coming from the recording. It was coming from the player itself, from inside the device. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around instantly, flashlight cutting across the attic beams, but nothing moved. Just dust. Just silence. I climbed down fast, clutching the recorder tight, and slammed the attic hatch shut, locking it with the sliding bar I'd found near the ladder. I went straight to Mrs. Delaney's, pounding on her door until she opened it, eyes wide and sunken, like she hadn't slept either. "You went up there," she said flatly, not asking, just knowing. I nodded once, holding out the recorder. This was Reeves's. There's a recording with Emily's voice on it, from 1974. Her face drained of color instantly. "That's not her," she whispered. "Not yet. It's them. They're ahead of you now." "Ahead of me?" I asked, chest tight. She nodded slowly, gripping my wrist with surprising strength for her age. "You've made too much noise, too many recordings, too many playbacks. Every time you listen, you teach them more about you. What you love, what you fear. And now..." She paused, eyes flicking to the trees beyond the cabins. "They know her name." That night I set up 3 bone chimes instead of 2. One above the front door, one above the back, one above my bedroom window. I taped the edges tighter than before, checked every latch twice, triple-checked the locks. At 11:47 p.m., the wind stopped completely. The bone chime above the back door stirred once, soft and slow, then went still. At 11:52, the landline clicked once. Dead air, no tone, no static, just an empty hum like silence being pulled apart. And then at 11:59, my phone lit up. A video message. No number attached. I hesitated before pressing play. The screen showed the attic of cabin 6, grainy night vision, but the hatch was closed. Then, after 4 seconds, the camera panned slowly until it faced the farthest corner, where I'd found the crate earlier that day. Someone was crouched there, facing. Away from the camera, long hair falling over their shoulders, yellow jacket, mud-streaked. My throat closed instantly. Emily. "No," I whispered, shaking my head, refusing to believe it, refusing to let myself believe it. Then the figure turned slowly toward the camera, and it was my face. The video cut to black. At exactly midnight, 3 soft knocks came from the attic door above me, perfectly spaced, calm, patient, and deliberate. I didn't sleep after the video from the attic. The image of Emily turning toward the camera and showing my face kept replaying in my head like a broken reel. By dawn, I knew I couldn't wait anymore. Reeves's map was spread across the table, its creases darkened by fingerprints. The black circle labeled LSF burned into my mind. If the lost signal field was the center of this, if that was where Reeves had seen them first, then I needed to know what was waiting there. I packed light, flashlight, recorder, 2 bone chimes, Reeves's map, and the baseball bat. Before leaving, I stopped at Mrs. Delaney's. She opened the door before I knocked, eyes red, face pale. "You're going to the field," she said, flatly. It wasn't a question. "You can't stop me," I said, my voice rough. She pressed a small cloth pouch into my palm, its weight heavier than it looked. "Salt and iron," she whispered. "Lay it in a circle around you when the silence starts, and Alex," her hand tightened on my wrist, her voice trembling. "No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, do not speak her name inside the field." I nodded, even though I didn't understand why, and left before I lost my nerve. The trail to the creek was familiar now, too familiar. But today the forest felt different. No birds, no wind, Even the crunch of my boots seemed swallowed by the earth, like the sound refused to exist here. By the time I reached the creek, the yellow scrap of Emily's jacket was gone, cleanly removed, branch stripped bare. My stomach tightened as I crossed the slick stones, following the coordinates deeper into the woods. The air grew colder with every step, thick with damp moss and the faint metallic tang of rain that hadn't fallen. After 20 minutes, I reached it, an open clearing choked in fog, ringed by black pines bending unnaturally inward as though leaning to listen. I stepped into the center and said softly, "Hello?" Nothing. Not quiet. Nothing. My own voice didn't return, didn't carry, didn't exist. The lost signal field. I crouched low, scanning the mossy ground. That's when I found it. A cluster of small objects half buried in the earth. Cracked Polaroids, warped from moisture but still visible. I brushed the dirt from one and froze. Emily. Standing right where I was now, her face half turned, hair wet, expression blurred but frightened. Behind her, in the photo, there was someone else. Or something else. A tall figure, pale and indistinct, standing in the fog just beyond the tree line. My breath caught. I flipped through the other Polaroids, 6 in total, all from different angles, and in every single one, Emily was there. But in each photo her position shifted like she'd been moving in a circle, and in each photo the pale figure was closer. That's when I heard it. Not knocking this time, not voices. A faint, high-pitched hum, deep beneath the silence, vibrating, inside my skull instead of through the air. I pulled out Reeves's small device from the attic, the one covered in dials and switches, and flicked it on. The screen stayed dead, but the machine began to click steadily, matching the vibration. In my ears, it was detecting something. A transmission. I rotated one of the knobs slowly, and static filled the tiny speaker, sharp and erratic, until a voice cut through suddenly. Reeves, his tone urgent, frantic. "If you hear this, you're standing, in the field, leave. Now. It knows you're here." I froze, the recorder clutched tight in my hand, but then something else came through on the same channel. "Alex," Emily's voice, clear, sharp, behind me. I spun around fast. Nothing but fog, trees stretching endlessly. The voice came again, closer this time. "Alex, it's me, please. I can't find my way out." My throat locked, and for one horrible second I almost said her name. Almost. Instead I pulled the salt pouch from my pocket, knelt quickly and scattered it in a rough circle around where I stood. The air grew heavier instantly, pressing in like weight on my chest, the fog thickening, shifting unnaturally as if it didn't belong to the weather. Then I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, circling just outside the salt ring. A shape moved, in the mist, low, pale, bending slightly forward, its limbs just wrong enough to make my stomach twist. I clutched the bat, every muscle locked, refusing to blink. The thing stopped moving. Silence swallowed the clearing. Then, in my own voice, perfectly replicated, it whispered from directly behind me, "Lower the salt." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Another whisper, this time Emily's. "Alex, it's safe." No. I clenched my jaw so tight it ached, forcing myself to stare at the moss beneath my boots, waiting, counting breaths. That's when the fog ahead shifted, and a second figure appeared, taller, broader, standing perfectly still, half hidden behind a tree. Reeves' voice crackled from the device again, louder this time. "Don't look up. Whatever you do, don't look up." So I didn't. But I didn't have to. The shadow fell across the moss in front of me. Long, impossibly thin, stretching into my salt circle even though nothing had crossed the boundary. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would drown out everything. But the hum beneath the silence only grew stronger, resonating through my chest like it was inside me now. and then the device in my hand clicked violently 3 times before dying completely, smoke curling from its vents. The sound stopped. The fog stilled. And just like that, the field went quiet again. Not safe. Just still. I backed out slowly, never breaking the circle until my boots hit the edge of the tree line. The moment I crossed back into the woods, the world rushed in, whirring wind, birds, the distant sound of running water from the creek. But something followed me. I knew it before I turned around. The fog didn't stay behind this time. It leaked slowly from the clearing, spilling into the trees like a living thing, curling between trunks, wrapping around roots. I ran, my breath ragged, legs burning, pushing through the underbrush until the cabin came into view through the thinning mist. I slammed the door behind me, locking both bolts, chest heaving, hands shaking so hard I could barely turn the key. Then my phone lit up on the table. A new video message, no number. I hesitated before pressing play. The screen showed the inside of Cabin 6 in my living room, filmed from the corner where the porch cam was mounted. At first, everything looked normal. Then the camera panned slowly toward the bedroom door. Emily stood there motionless, one hand resting on the frame. Her head turned slowly toward the lens, lips parting as if to speak. The video cut to black. 3 knocks came from the bedroom door immediately after. I didn't move after the 3 knocks from the bedroom door. I couldn't. The video of Emily on the porch cam kept replaying in my head, her hand resting on the frame, her face turning toward the lens, lips parting like she was about to say my name before the feed cut out. My recorder was armed but muted on the table. I didn't want proof of this. I wanted it to not exist. The silence stretched until my ears rang, until the ticking of the wall clock felt like hammer strikes against my ribs. Finally, I whispered under my breath, "It's not her." The knocking stopped immediately. The rest of the night passed without sound, without chimes, without messages, but I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor, back pressed against the far wall, the baseball bat clutched so tightly in my hands that the wood dug grooves into my palms. My notebook lay open beside me, Pastor Reeves's rules scrawled in dark ink, underlined again and again. Don't answer. Don't open. Don't play it back after dark. Don't speak her name in the field. And now there was a new one written, in shaky, uneven letters beneath the rest. Don't trust what remembers you. By sunset the next day, the air in Dry Creek had shifted. It wasn't weather. It wasn't wind. It was weight, pressing low, suffocating, like standing under a storm that would never break. I set the bone chimes above every door, every window, every possible point of entry. Salt lined the sills, the baseboards, the vents. I checked each lock 3 times, then 4. None of it mattered. I knew it before the night began. This was night 14. At 11:36 p.m., the heater died early again, leaving the cabin cold, the air tight and still. I sat against the living room wall, flashlight off, watching the front door. My phone lay face down. Beside me, powered off, but at 11:48 the screen lit anyway, faint blue leaking onto the floorboards. A video notification blinked once, then disappeared before I could touch it. At 11:59 the wind stopped completely. At exactly midnight the porch cam activated on its own. I turned the phone over slowly, dread crawling up my spine, and saw the feed shake violently, struggling to stabilize. Then it focused. The camera faced the porch steps, the gravel drive beyond, and 20 figures stood in the fog, perfectly still, perfectly silent. All of them looked human at first glance, dressed in coats, flannel, boots, some barefoot, some holding nothing, others clutching objects they shouldn't, a phone, a backpack, an old stuffed bear darkened by weather. But when the feed sharpened, my blood ran cold. Every single face was mine. 20 copies. Standing in silence, then all at once they tilted their heads in unison, their movements sharp and unnatural, like strings pulled too tight. One stepped forward, pale lips parting, and my own voice came through the speaker. "Alex, we've been waiting." I dropped the phone, heart slamming against my ribs, and backed slowly into the hallway. The bone chime above the back door rattled once, twice, then stopped dead. And then came the sound, not knocking this time. Something inside the walls, a scraping, deliberate and slow, working its way downward. Wood fibers splintering as if claws, were tracing the beams moving toward the floor. I grabbed the recorder from the table, pressed record and whispered, "Reeves, if you left anything I need to know, now would be a good time." The static hissed faintly in the background, and then, impossibly, his voice came through live. "You can't keep them out tonight. Alex, listen to me. It was never about the door. The door was the test. They wanted your voice on the other side. They wanted you to speak." My chest went tight. "What happens if I do?" Static. Then Reeves again, broken, distant. "Then you belong to the field." The recorder popped, sharp enough to sting my ears, and went dead in my hand. At 12:07, the lights cut out. The only sound left was the faint creak of weight shifting overhead in the attic. I froze, breath locked in my chest, and reached slowly for the bat. Then, from the far end of the hallway, the attic hatch dropped open on its own, hitting the floor with a dull, deliberate thud. Something climbed down. The sound was wrong. Not boots, not feet. A dragging weight, joints moving too far, too many angles bending where they shouldn't. I pressed myself into the shadow by the kitchen wall, pulse hammering, listening as it reached the hallway floorboards and stopped. Silence, stretched thin, deep, endless. Then I heard it breathe. Low, wet, hollow. "Alex." My sister's voice whispered from the dark. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt, refusing to speak, refusing to answer. My chest ached with the effort not to move, not to react. The sound shifted, my mother's voice this time. "Honey, it's cold out here. Let me in." Tears stung my eyes before I could stop them, but I didn't move, didn't make a sound. Then, it stopped pretending. My own voice filled the hallway, not from one place but everywhere, layered and broken, echoing through the cabin like a memory folding in on itself. "I know where you hid the photos. I know where you buried the tape. I know what you saw at the creek." My stomach lurched. It had my memories now. The fog rolled against the windows outside, so thick it muted the moonlight completely. And then faintly, beneath everything, came a sound I'd prayed never to hear again. The warped, four-note chime from Emily's 911 tape, playing faintly from somewhere deep in the trees. The front door handle twisted once, twice. Then a single, soft knock. I stared at the chain, holding my breath, every muscle screaming to stay still. Through the silence, a soft, steady voice spoke, inches from the doorframe. Emily's voice. "Alex, please." I shut my eyes, tears slipping hot down my face, forcing myself to stay silent. The second knock came louder, then a third. The bone chimes above every door rattled violently, every single one spinning hard enough to tangle themselves, even though the air inside the cabin was completely still. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. Then the porch cam feed came back online on its own. I turned my head slowly, heart pounding, and saw the 20 figures still standing there in the fog. Only now there were 21, and the new one was Emily. She stepped forward. The others followed. I dropped the bat, slammed my hand against the main breaker, and killed every ounce of power in the cabin, plunging it into total darkness. My recorder clicked one last time before dying completely, leaving one single line etched into the file name before it shut off forever. "You opened. IT.